This week on the Marketplace of Ideas, a conversation with Chris Bohn, editor of the magazine The Wire, Adventures in Modern Music. It's the Marketplace of Ideas. I'm Colin Marshall. Chris Bohn is the editor of The Wire, the independent monthly music magazine that has covered the alternative, the underground, and the non-mainstream since 1982. It is also, to my mind, the finest cultural publication in existence. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here. Yeah.
I was reading a bit of an old profile, a slightly older profile of the magazine in the Telegraph, I believe, and it had a quote from you saying that The Wire is best thought of as a magazine that does not cover certain types of music rather than a magazine that does cover certain types. So I'll put the question to you. What does The Wire not cover?
Well, I guess the stuff that's you could consider to be like heavily featured in the mainstream media. Yeah, with kind of obviously there's some crossover with mainstream media and underground non-commercial media, but generally we just have no interest in covering stuff that you just see on. If you go to a newsstand and you just see a range of magazines, be it music, culture, fashion, whatever, and you just see the certain names cropping up over and over again, we just have absolutely no interest in being part of that interchangeability of faces, names, etc., etc. We just rather focus on the music that interests us, and that is most frequently described. You can most frequently say that the music that we're interested in is non-mainstream music, underground music, whatever that means, and that's kind of a very movable. That's a very slippery word, you could say, because underground in a political sense is a whole lot different from underground in a Western commercial sense, where in London, in London or in, I should imagine where you come from, where almost anything goes, passes in any media. You can do anything without consequences. But last November, I was in Leipzig for a festival of DDR underground culture that's from the German Democratic Republic period, or the communist period in East Germany that it obtained between 1948 and 1989 before the wall came down.
Yes.
And then underground culture had a totally different meaning. So sometimes it's a salutary reminder to know that sometimes the music is as serious as your life, and you can end up in jail for playing it. That's not often the case here. So every so often, I have to just take one step back from the word underground and remind myself that it can be a far different thing to what we perceive as underground music. Yeah.
And since The Wire is read all over the world and targeted toward international readership, and as you mentioned, the word underground, it takes on different resonances to people of different nations. As well, does the concept of what is not mainstream take on different resonances to people of different places, different regions of the world? Because the mainstream is obviously going to be somewhat different in each place. Are you against the mainstream, whatever the mainstream may be in any given nation?
To say we're against the mainstream is, yeah, okay, I probably did. It did sound like that. It's just that we're not interested in it. It's not against it. We just don't. Well, speaking personally, there's very little in mainstream culture generally that fascinates me or interests me. So, yeah, of course, it changes from country to country. But for instance, are Sonic Youth mainstream now? I would argue not, even though they had a long period of fairly successful activity as being signed to Geffen Records. But the music they made and all their interests went way beyond just being way beyond what you'd expect of a group signed to a mainstream label like Geffen Records. And Geffen, the fact that Geffen could accommodate Sonic Youth, presumably either for the kudos that went with having a group like Sonic Youth on the label, and for the kind of groups, other artists that Sonic Youth would attract to the label, or because they were paying somehow that they covered the costs and they made some profit for Geffen. I don't know what their relationship was with Geffen, but so obviously you can't discount anything just because it's mainstream. But to go back to your question, yes, the idea of the mainstream does shift from country to country, and if it's sort of new and interesting to us in the magazine, we presume that it might be of interest to our readership too. But there's a way. What we try to do is get a balance between. We accept that we have a very intelligent and informed readership, and that's our starting point. So we never want it. So if we kind of pick up on something from, I don't know, from a country which is where the music is considered mainstream, but it has something of musical interest and it resonates beyond that. It resonates in a different way by the time it's reached our shores. Then what we would do, we would just approach it on we would try to approach it for what it is as a piece of music, and then build up an article from there and take into account its success or otherwise in the country of origin. Sorry, I hope that explains.
No, that's perfectly fine. Now, we should be clear about this then. It's not as if you're looking at a London newsstand and looking at the copy of Mojo or what have you and saying, well, we'll look at this and not be this. We'll be the opposite of this. It's more that's kind of orthogonal to what you want to be, because you're driven entirely by the desires of the readership and the staff, correct?
Yeah. In that sense, it's a kind of community, you could say, and within that community, there'll be obviously a lot of argument. There'll be a degree of agreement, but there would also be a lot of discussion and dialogue going on within that community of what is worth it and what is worthy of our attention. Yeah, but sure, we don't judge ourselves against Mojo and or Uncut or other magazines. And every so often there might even be some crossover with those magazines in terms of areas of interest, krautrock or whatever, or Pierre Henry making records with Spooky Tooth might get reviewed in both magazines, but our interest would come from primarily from the Pierre Henry's involvement, most likely, and whereas their interest would come from the fact that Spooky Tooth were working with Pierre Henry.
The border cases are kind of fascinating, where the mainstream touches it, but the wire touches it as well. I always think of Björk as that kind of figure. If I'm correct or not about that, I don't know, but she's been on the cover of The Wire, but she's also been in some of the most mainstream venues one could think of.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's a very interesting kind of, it's a portal for us in terms of bringing in people. If they see Björk on the cover of The Wire, people who are not familiar with The Wire, but they see Björk and interested in Björk, they might find that it might bring them to a lot of other interesting musics, which Björk herself would do, because Björk's interests go beyond the usual mainstream interests. And likewise with Radiohead and likewise with Sonic Youth, all these artists they're kind of like below the deceptive surface of what they do is a lot of fascinating interests that kind of that feeds into their music, and even if it doesn't always, you don't always hear it. But also, Björk, like Sonic Youth, is very vocal about her interests, and that is really useful, I think, for the kind of musical cultures that we cover, because it does introduce a lot of a much larger audience, perhaps, to some very interesting, conceivably difficult musics to a public that would not otherwise arrive to it. Hopefully, if they come via The Wire, they'll get introduced to a lot of other different, interesting, weird, fascinating areas that. So I think in that sense, it's great to have people like Björk and Sonic Youth, and from my personal point of view, to a group like Radiohead to a lesser extent, but even so, Radiohead, they also have a lot of interest beyond, they take them beyond the average rock group. So and these people are obviously really important, I think, to musical culture generally, for that reason.
I would imagine, though, that there's some contingent on the reverse side of the Wire's audience, of the Wire's readership, that if you talk about somebody like a Sonic Youth or Björk or Radiohead, they will write in and say, how could you talk about somebody so well known as a Radiohead or a Sonic Youth or Björk? Does that happen?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, there's a lot of holier than that, and yeah, or hipper than now, you could say. People in any area you work with, and of course that some people are going to be totally disgusted by the fact we might feature Björk or Björk or Sonic Youth in the magazine. But I think if you don't have to scratch very hard at the surface of what they're doing to arrive at the depth of their interest in this music. So we happily stand by the covers we've had of these people, and we can. We don't have to defend it. We don't feel like we're defending it. We kind of celebrate the difference in music, and Sonic Youth and Björk embody that to a greater or lesser extent. Yeah.
I'd like to get back a little bit to the issue of the readership of The Wire and sort of the way that The Wire itself interacts with its readers. It seems like the relationship is a closer one, and probably a much closer one than most music magazines have with their readers. And you can tell by the flavor, by the tone of the letters page, that the readers are also very willing to engage on a high level with the magazine. Now, am I just being thrown off by the letters that are selected, or is that kind of that level of discourse kind of the norm that you receive there?
You're right. The level of discourse with our readers is pretty high. I think a lot of that we experience personally when the Wire has a stand or something at various festivals around Europe and before in America. In Chicago, and by meeting and talking and discussing and getting engaged in pretty deep or heavy conversations or arguments sometimes with our readers in public. Yes, what you have to say is absolutely right. We do. We have a very intelligent, very passionate, highly highly argumentative readership, and we love it. Yeah. We love them for that. We're not seeking agreement or accord with our readers. We're seeking dialogue and debate with them in the same way, ideally, that we feel about our writer, about the musicians and artists we talk to.
And it does seem as well that in addition to there being a closer relationship with the readers, there in fact is a closer relationship with the artists. I get the impression that an artist who maybe wouldn't want to talk to a Mojo, say, would want to talk to The Wire. Is that at all the case?
Well, it's difficult to say. I don't know what Mojo's relationship with artists is. Of course, we get turned down by artists and musicians every now and again, but we do have a good relationship with musicians. But we do, and also a number of our writers are also musicians and artists. So we don't see it as us against them. Far from it. We also, to a certain degree, we're kind of there's a fairly broad front, which kind of takes in the artists that we talk about, our readers, and we say it's a fairly broad front against mainstream mediocrity, I would say, yeah. And so, yeah. I reiterate, it's not us against them. So. And I would like to think that the musicians feel the same about us, even though we do have our fights, struggles.
And spending some time in the world of The Wire, which I do whenever I read an issue, I suppose, I do notice that, like we've mentioned, there tends to be a not doubling up of roles necessarily, but for example, a musician may also be a journalist in the world of experimental music, may also be a reader of The Wire. They might write for The Wire occasionally, and there's this exchange between the roles people take in the world of the music The Wire covers. And how much does that actually go on? I get the impression that a lot of the time people do move from sort of subsphere to subsphere quite frequently in this realm.
Publisher and former editor and Tony Harrington said it very well. There's always been in music writing a passion, especially in kind of marginal, subcultural or underground, however you want to describe it, non-left field, non-mainstream music, a passion on behalf of individuals that starts sometimes with them selling records in the back of a barrow in a marketplace, as that happened especially the case a lot with reggae, to kind of also wanting to get this music across and what it's all about more. So that would lead them to write about it, and also to sometimes it would be the musicians themselves would be similarly engaged and would also have enough interest in music as well, in other music, and to want to write about it, and to keep a discourse going, keep all channels open, and about the culture they're part of. And so we try not to. It's all to do with a passion for music and getting across that and sharing that passion with other people, whether it's selling obscure records or records that are hard to get hold of to other people, writing about the artists who are making it, or the artists themselves engaging with the music they love, not only their own, of course, but the other musics, and discussing that. And writing about that because they have something to say about it, or maybe they're trying to, or like myself, I got into music writing to actually try to understand what it was that kind of obsessed, to understand and work out what it was I was liking about what were perceived as difficult or antisocial musics way back when I first started writing about it, and so to try to explain to myself why what it is I was liking about, or explain to or to a mythical second or to a virtual partner or whatever, why it is that I was interested in I don't know, a group like Einstein and Neubauten, who way back in the day were perceived to be deadly asocial, destructive, and whatever. And so what was it about that music that kind of interested me? Was it because it's destructive? Maybe that would be an initial attraction. But what is it about that music that held you there? Surely not just the destruction. Of course not. It's just the destructive element. What is it about that destructive character that made it go beyond that? What was it they were constructing out of the ruins of the music? The leveling effects of what they were doing with noise, etc., in their early days, and what were they constructing out of among the ruins that they're leaving behind them? And that's what kind of trying to explain that is what it's got me involved, and with that, got me involved in writing about it, and that's what's sustained me here now. Probably because I don't fully understand right now why it is what it is about the music that holds me to it. So I'm still trying to get to it. Now I would imagine that's the case whether it's let's say, I'm going to try to think of an example. David Keenan, who is one of our major writers, the main writers, who has been in a number of groups in the past, and he also runs Volcanic Tongue. And so, in one way, David embodies all these things I'm talking about. He sells a lot of very difficult to get hold of obscure records out of his Volcanic Tongue website. He writes about music, related to that, and he's also appeared in a number of different groups, and from Phantom Engineer to Type Meteor, and so we're not so concerned about boxing people in particular roles as maybe other magazines might.
Now, how much of your own sort of passion for the world of difficult music, how much of it is simply the fact that you enjoy listening to this type of sound, just purely the sound waves in you like to have an art experience with those, and how much of it is that you like the culture that surrounds difficult and experimental music?
The first thing is yes, you're attracted to music, so you somehow it only starts appearing to be difficult when you're trying to explain it to somebody else. So difficult. The difficulty in itself is not the thing that attracts you to. There's some kind of passion. It's appealing somehow to you. And as I say, you're trying to explain that appeal to a third person. You're trying to open up the excitement sort of generated by the perceived difficulty in that music to a third party, or to the reader, or to your partner, or whatever. So, sorry, what was the question again, Colin? Yeah.
The extent to which your own love for the world of difficult music is to do with the music itself, which of course is going to be a substantial part, but is some of the love also from the type of culture that surrounds what we'll call difficult music, the sort of people and the way they engage with it as a whole sort of miniature society?
You can't separate them. The people who make the music. It's a culture. It's a community thing, isn't it? So yeah, for sure, one's attracted to community. And sometimes, obviously, when I was much younger and maybe more stupid and impressionable, been drawn to punk first. Well, before even earlier than punk, to the whole culture around the music and what it's. Yeah, you can't. They're utterly inseparable. I think the people who make it, the culture from which it out of which it arises, and the culture which kind of it feeds back into. So yeah, I can't see any difference. To tell you the truth, yeah.
I'd like to touch back on one thing we mentioned a bit earlier, which was that this phenomenon that in the type of music that The Wire covers, there still exist recordings that are hard to find, things that are tough to track down. There still exist rarities in a musical situation worldwide where it seems to many people that because of the internet, because of the distribution channels there are, because of file sharing or what have you, there are no more rarities. It is something that seems to fascinate people that in the type of music The Wire covers, there's still a lot of that searching to be done. Is that correct?
Yeah, there always will be. There's always a holy grail just beyond. You think you found it, and something else is there. I'm not an avid collector personally, but obviously there's certain kinds of music that obsess you, and you start chasing it down, and you want to get you really want to get hold of it because you've either read about it or because you have a particular interest in that artist, and it seems to be the key to something or whatever. So you really want to chase it down. Of course, with these days with the blogosphere posting a lot of these musics, it is much easier to get hold of some things that seemed way beyond reach years and years ago. But even so, I am of an age and of where actually having the physical object has some significance, and also I do feel that me personally that artists, musicians, or whatever should get paid for what they do. So the idea of just downloading stuff free from the internet, okay, when it's very rare and it's impossible to get hold of, that's very, very useful. But I do kind of like one, that the artist gets paid, or two, that I'd like to have the whole thing in front of me, whether it's the album or CD or whatever. I just feel that it makes it that much more real. An example of something that I've been looking for a long time was Akio Suzuki and Takahisa Kosugi's album, A New Way of Hearing, which took, I had an MP3 of it, somebody had given me, and it was only so satisfying to hear it via a computer or for digital forms, and somehow I managed to get hold of the album, and it meant a whole lot. It made much more sense to see it in front of me, to see the artwork, to get some impression of what Kosugi and Suzuki were up to from the photos on it. Yeah, it just made it that much more real, and just the physicality of in this case vinyl. It made the music for me that much more palpable. So sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
I think that does answer it, but tell me if I'm correct in this impression that the artists that The Wire covers, they don't seem as bothered by the whole internetization of music as, say, more mainstream artists might be. For example, I flip through the pages of The Wire and I see a bunch of creative things that artists covered in The Wire do. They don't seem to be as bothered by the fact that people are doing file sharing. perhaps because they weren't selling as many units to begin with. But they don't. One doesn't get the sense that they are wringing their hands.
Of course not. And say, don't get me wrong. I think the internet is really valuable as a way of spreading information and new ideas about music. And I think The Wire is very much part of that thing. We pull together a lot of things that it would take people days or whatever to find independently on the internet by following links and whatever. So I think The Wire has benefited enormously from the internet, and I think a lot of the musicians that The Wire covers also use the internet very, very well to get across their ideas, to get their music heard, and it doesn't diminish in any way their standing. I think it has had an impact on people, the number of records that certain people sell, and that I think is a shame. But at the same time, I don't think there's any. I don't think a lot of people. I think people use internet more than get damaged by the internet in Wire world, in the world of The Wire. The artists in the world of The Wire, they use it very, and some musicians use it very, very well. Because records aren't the be all and end all in the world of The Wire. In fact, it's the opposite. Live improvisations, one-off, site-specific performance. Installation work. None of these things is about records per se, or documented recordings per se. And when they are documented, quite often they can only be a very diminished souvenir of that, because how can you get across the three-dimensionality of playing in a cave, for instance, like Suzuki or John Butcher have done? You can get across something from that on a recording, but it's never going to be it's not going to have the same impact as being there and experiencing that, or a sound installation by Rolf Julius with their tiny speakers buried by a lakeside. These things are very, very site specific, and through the internet, people can get some sense of it, and a good sense of what Rolf Julius is doing or why he wants to do it through his own site or through discussions around it, and also Yes, because it's not all about recording. It's not all about CD. It's not all about records. Far from it. It's about performance, and it's about in that performance what we The Wire do and what people on the internet do is document somehow that the ideas of the performance, or the ideas of the artists are dealing with, or why they may be doing this, why they might be wanting to perform in very particular locations, what sound art is all about. And it's not about recordings, DVDs or whatever. It is about something that happens in the moment or in the space. And so how can you document that? So the only way you can document it is through photographs, discussion, and possibly the recording that gets across the sound element, or maybe a 5.1. Maybe through 5.1 DVD audio now, you can get a greater sense of music if it's played in a particular space, but you're never going to get the full physicality of that space, what people are seeing when they're experiencing it, what the atmosphere in the room, the temperature, all these things just make it a one-of-a-kind moment. And once it's passed, it's past. It's great to document it. It's great to talk and document it as best one can, but these things are what are really important, I think. The records, they might be a little bit more permanent, but in the end, they're just kind of like calling cards. The records conceived as a record, of course, that's a totally different matter. But in the culture that we work in, because it's a commodity culture for everybody, they're allowed far too great an importance, I think. And I think that's one thing that The Wire is. That we do kind of fight against, to try to get across that it's not all about records. It's not all about having, even though it's a very important part of it, it's not all about that. It can be about the moment. It can be about a site-specific place. It can be just something that's been and gone, and it's never going to come back again. And the only way it'll be recalled is through description, through memory, through the artist talking to the artist about it, or even just writing about something, as in this current issue that I'm not sure whether you will have seen it yet, where we have a very individual, Ken Hollings writing a very individual take on Edgar Varese, as seen through Ken bounces Edgar Varèse's music through Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus, and the best thing is to read it rather than me try to describe it to yourself. So again, this is nothing, and also, well, Edgar Varèse is a very good case insofar as his recordings, the complete works of Edgar Varèse, as we know them, can probably be experienced in an afternoon almost. So, but there are a lot of things that came and went, or were specific to his expo installations that cannot really be reproduced on record. So it's not all about records and commodities, even though, of course, I'm sitting in a room surrounded by thousands of things. So you caught me out.
If you've just tuned in, this is the Marketplace of Ideas. I'm Colin Marshall. You can find our complete interview archive completely for free at colinmarshallradio.com. My guest is Chris Bohn, editor of The Wire, Adventures in Modern Music. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything, send those along to Colin at colinmarshallradio.com. It is fascinating, though, that the artists in Wire World, I'll call it that, they're good at using the internet, as we said. They're good at using physical spaces, good at using the moment, good at using non-reproducible happenings to further their own cause. But they do also seem to be better at making physical records. I mean, I think about USB drives made out of wood with the name signed on it, or I think about handmade CDRs that go out in editions of 250. They also seem to be strong in that area.
Absolutely, and they personalise something that has become cheapened and coarsened through mass production by doing this in these limited edition runs. It's nothing to do with elitism. It's to do with just like creating kind of artworks out of something that has become cheapened. So that's great. And I fully agree with you. It's one of the most and that's why these people are not affected by all this talk about declining record sales, because it's not even the kind of artworks they create through CDR, their handmade CDRs or covers, or as you say, these USB sticks now. It goes way beyond the idea of it takes it into a different art market possibly, but the the hands-on involvement in all this just makes it that much more, I don't know, desirable. It just makes it that much more valuable, because some heart and soul has gone into each individual item, and that's what. It's a really fantastic aspect of the world that the Wire covers. I think that people will take the time to do this, and that's why people gathering around the merchandise stalls at live concerts, you can understand why they're doing it, because they're going to see something that's only going to be there for a moment and possibly gone. So there's obviously a deep interest in seeing what, say, Aaron Dillaway or Wolf Eyes might have in the past, might have had brought with them. Just it's going to be incredibly individual, very personal, and representing a very personable form of music production as well. Yeah.
It seems to me that in a way, the Wire itself is successful in the way that an artist covered in the Wire is successful, like we've just described. It's kind of a success by super specificity in a way. I know it's mentioned often that the Wire covers material, or it gives you journalism that you can't even find on the internet, no matter how hard you look, because some of it is that obscure, the material being covered. What are the similarities, do you think, between the Wire itself and the people the Wire focuses on?
I can't really answer that. Sorry, Colin. That you defeated me that question.
But yeah, I do see a bit of a correspondence there, and as well. I mean, there also is a similarity, as we talked about, the fact that the artists of Wire World, that they're not so worried as maybe more mainstream artists are. You can also see in the articles that get written or the interviews that get done that the Wire itself does not do as much hand wringing as mainstream magazines do about what has happened to their distribution sort of system. And I mean, my guess is the way I think of it is that if I read The Wire, it's because it takes advantage of the actual physical magazine medium, and I'm guessing that's a big priority there.
It is, yeah, yeah. No, we think it's very important that it's actually on paper rather than online. It's just the way people, the time people allow for something in physical form to read, they read it properly. I think it's much easier, for instance, to read a lengthy article, essay, or even a lengthy review, as opposed to just 3 or 4 lines saying whether you should buy something or not. So I think it makes all the difference. It's very important to us that it is actually a physical object. That it comes out in physical form on paper and in print. Yeah, as old-fashioned as that might sound to some people. Yeah.
And the long form of the articles you mentioned, because it's one of those things about the magazine that the writers do stretch out quite a bit if need be. They have the space to get into a lot of detail. And as the editor, you'll be well placed to answer this. How much space not like word count, but how much of a what is the sensibility about how much space a writer should have, as much as they need to get something done?
Well, realistically, you have to sort of give some rough guidelines to just because we only have so much space every month. So articles very rarely run longer than 8 pages, which sometimes, when we have special themed issues, then they can pretty much the whole issue might be devoted to the realization of that theme. But in terms of what we do, if we give guidelines to writers for reviewing CDs, we always make it clear that if it takes more space than those guidelines allow to get across what it is about what's in the record. If it takes more, if it cannot be discussed within that, then they should let us know and just write it to. It's negotiable, basically, that we will allow, when necessary, the review to run until the idea is fully realized. The areas that the Wire covers, they can't be sort of like summarized very easily in snappy sound bites. It takes a little bit of unpacking what the ideas have gone into the making of the record, or the ideas that the artists who it's covering deal with. So yeah, it's just natural to us that pieces have to be allowed the space to for those ideas to be fully unpacked.
And I imagine that policy is a fairly large draw for a writer, for example, thinking of what magazine do I want to write this for. The Wire's got an advantage just natively because they're going to perhaps allow the space that one needs to get something actually explained.
Yeah. It depends on the ambition of the writers in particular. We have the team of writers we have. Yes, I think they relish that aspect. Other writers who are in it for, I don't know, to be media celebrities or as a stepping stone to getting onto radio or onto TV and being, just so, for whatever that brings them, then the last thing they probably want is to spend a lot of time writing a wire-type article, which it can be incredibly demanding on the writer, and I would hope at the same time incredibly rewarding for the writer, and of course once it's printed for the reader too, and hopefully for the artist covered, so that everybody feels that the best has been brought out of the subject for all people concerned. Yeah, us, the magazine, the writer, the reader, and the artist, the subject of the piece.
what is the general idea for how much knowledge of the experimental music world should be assumed on the part of the reader of any given article? It seems like anybody could pick it up and just start reading, and they could catch up on what they need to know just by going through and picking up what they can. But what is the actual idea for, how much is it assumed the audience is going to come in knowing?
Well, we assume that the audience is intelligent and informed. We assume that we have an intelligent and informed readership, but we cannot immediately assume that they have some knowledge about I don't know, KG Heino or something, where KG Heino or the culture it comes out of. So what one tries to do is fill in all the information that's necessary for an intelligent and informed reader to get the best out of the article. I think we've got to the point now where we do realize that everybody knows that Miles Davis is a trumpeter, Coltrane played saxophone, etc., etc. So we don't have to keep repeating this information, even though that's not necessarily a bad thing. When everybody, like when broadsheet newspapers always refer to Obama as President Obama, just so everybody knows who he is after you. And that's not talking down to readers. That's just what we don't want is so that people have to feel that they're in the middle of reading something. They have to look somewhere else to fill in some bits of information. Obviously, space and etc. means that we can only get so much into an article. Yeah, but we assume that our readers have enough knowledge to be able to find their way through pretty much anything. I think we open up. What we're trying to do always is open up the subject rather than close it down. We're not trying to make things more difficult, or what we're trying to do is get across the excitement of that difficulty or whatever that music's coming from, or what it is in it that makes it unique, special, individual. What it is that makes it idiosyncratic, and that's what we're trying to get across. And so, if that some people will know more than others, and some people might think, well, why are the wire telling me this? But we do acknowledge that there's going to be other people coming to the subject pretty much new, and it's going to need a little bit more explaining to them than it might be to your average college professor or something. Yeah,
there's a core mission there to, shall we say, make the inaccessible accessible.
Make the inaccessible exciting.
Yes,
we don't assume that everything is for everybody. Not everybody reading the Wire is going to love everything in it. Some people will get turned off by, I don't know, our critical beats column. Some people have absolutely, to certain readers, I'm sure it's complete anathema to them that there's music with heavy 4/4 beats in it, But sorry, okay, fine. Flip the page, you'll find something else that will be of interest to you. The Wire is not for everybody, but anybody who comes to it should be able to enter it at any point and understand what's going on and be stimulated, one would hope, by something that might not have otherwise thought would be of any interest to them whatsoever. And that's our mission, really, to excite people about what we feel passionate about, whether it's the Stooges or whether it's Akio Suzuki, or whether it's Basic Channel, So this is our mission. This is the way we perceive it. Yeah.
I want to get an idea of your own journey to The Wire. Now, the first chunk of your music journalism career was at NME, New Musical Express, correct?
No, it was at Melody Maker.
It was? Okay. Why did I think that?
Because Melody Maker's disappeared, for one thing. No, but I mean, I'm originally from Birmingham in the Midlands, in the English Midlands. I came down to London in 1977 because, after coming back from Germany, after spending 6 months in Germany, and this was when reading about what was going on in Britain at the time, the punk music and everything that was happening at the time, it just seemed like the wrong time to be in Germany. So once I felt that I'd been there, it just got to the point when I wanted to be back in Britain because the music, what's happening in the music scene was just really thrilling. And I moved to London when I got back to England, worked for a record company, Polydor Records, working with groups like Susie and the Banshees, Richard Strange, Doctors of Madness, Sham 69, with a back catalogue that took in the Verve, Verve Jazz, took in Velvet Underground, Frank Zappa, etc., etc. But then it became very unsatisfying working in a press office, and you just wanted to cut out the middleman and write about this stuff yourself. So very fortunately managed to get a job on Major Maker, and from Major Maker to NME, and NME, that's probably, I don't know, then from NME I just went freelance in about the middle of the 80s and continued from there.
And so from that point, you found your way to The Wire how?
Well, Richard Cook, who was a colleague at NME, became the editor of The Wire, and when it was much more of a, well, in the early, I don't know whether you're familiar with the very early days of The Wire, when it was much more devoted to jazz, free improvisation, and and contemporary music. Richard kind of broadened it out a bit to take in marginal rock or whatever how you'd like to describe it, and that's when I started writing for The Wire under Richard Cook's editorship. Yeah.
Since you've been involved with The Wire, have you seen it change in any serious ways? Like, of course, there was the big change from being more about jazz initially, as we just mentioned, to widening out. But since you've been involved on a more heavy basis, what have you seen change of the magazine's culture, if anything?
The change is the most significant changes happened just before I became a staff member, and that was when Tony Harrington, the publisher, took over the editorship before he was a publisher. When he took over the editorship, and that was when the magazine was struggling to find a voice, to find its own direction again. After there's a very strange period in the late 80s, early 90s when new jazz was looked like being a fairly dominant form, but it was very much kind of an idea of jazz that was based on I know it never felt that natural, but when that started petering out, and the various, and also when the magazine was going through some difficult times trying to find, this was a long time back now, and so maybe it would kind of try to they went through a period of maybe trying to interface a little bit more obviously with mainstream culture, and but then it's and with the lifestyle, blah blah blah, etc. And that when this new jazz in Britain partly seemed to be reflective of a upwardly mobile lifestyle choice, jazz being a sophisticated way of lifestyle accessory, and this is being highly reductive, and there's a lot of very good music that came out of this period. We're not talking about free and music now. We're talking about a very specific kind of British jazz revival, but a new form of British jazz. But anyway, so when it was emerging from that, and Tony Harrington took over the editorship, he made a decision that, okay, let's just focus on be part of a very particular culture and not aspire to anything else, and so not aspire to this lifestyle choice or whatever, and just focus on the artist, the culture that it was part of, and not try to be part of something else. So he just determined what it didn't want to be part of, and then work out what it did, and then just pursue that. Since then, I think we just pretty much follow that way. To be no part of it, as the group Heinz and Noydan said, in terms of the greater mainstream culture out there, and just define, just pursue those obsessions and those areas of interest that we consider important, significant, or whatever, and just stick with those, and obviously be alert and to the changes in those in the culture those cultures that obsess us, and just follow the passions to where they lead us. And sorry, I hope that answers your question.
Indeed, I like that you phrase it in terms of culture and not simply music, because of course it is known as a music magazine. It's got Adventures in Modern Music right there in the title. The radio show on Resonance is Adventures in Modern Music as well. But at the same time, I have always felt, and tell me if this is too grand a statement, but I have felt that The Wire contains within it a certain very specific world. It's kind of the gateway to a certain very specific world made out of a lot of world subcultures, and it, in a way, I don't even approach it as simply a music magazine, but more but I really can't describe more of how I do think about it because it is of course ostensibly about music, but maybe
Yeah.
it's more a magazine about it's kind of a sensibility toward art and maybe life if I want to get really grand about it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's difficult to express it without making it sound pompous, but fundamentally, I'd agree with what you're saying. But it is very difficult to say it like that without it sounding pretty too grandiose. But yeah, we devoted I don't know 14, 15 years of our lives to this, and we want to continue with it. It's difficult to shake it off. It's a drug, It's an addiction, and we love it. Yeah.
And it's one of the few magazines I hear that is very optimistic about being able to stick around, being able to do it for all the foreseeable future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously, we like to think so, but I think because the cultures that we cover, I mean, they're very resilient because the artists and all the people involved in it, they've never been. They're not so prone to all the ideas of recession. Obviously, we're all affected by it, but because it's always been a struggle, But the aim is not to make money, to make millions or whatever. Even though obviously nobody would complain if they did. The aim is to make the music and to get across there and to get across that music, get that music or that art or whatever out there into you get it heard, get it seen, get it experienced, and for those very reasons, it's not recession proof, but it's very resilient, the culture, and I think The Wire is always optimistic because of that. It survived some difficult times, and we will continue to do so.
The name of the magazine, once again, is The Wire, Adventures in Modern Music. Chris Bohn, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the program.
Well, thank you, and thanks for talking to you and taking so much interest in the magazine and giving us a chance to talk about it. Yep.
If you'd like to find out more about The Wire, visit, of course, thewire.co.uk. This has been the Marketplace of Ideas. I've been Colin Marshall. You can find our complete interview archive on our website, colinmarshallradio.com, or you can check out the website of Ben Althouse, who produces our theme music at benalthouse.com. If you have any feedback, positive, negative, neutral, or anywhere in between, questions, comments, suggestions, whatever, send that along to Colin@colinmarshallradio.com. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.